Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Go to shiftingculturepodcast.com to interact or donate. If you will, would you go to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating or review? It would help get this podcast out to more people. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please recommend it to your friends and your network. We have a great episode for you today. We speak with Peyton Jones. He's an author, trainer. He's a coach, the founder of New Breed Training, which is a gathering of church planters heeding the call to plant churches in broken places. We discuss some of Peyton's new book called Church Plantology, and we get into some very fun conversations that I'm sure you're going to enjoy. So without further ado, here's Peyton Jones. Peyton Jones, thanks for coming. Thanks for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, it's always good to have a ministry ninja like yourself on the podcast.
Well, you never see us coming. That's the thing about ninjas. You know, they steal out of the shadows, they strike hard, and then they're gone. You don't even know if it's been a ninja or not.
I know. Well, we'll see. I mean, you might just disappear in the middle of this. We'll see how it goes.
That could happen.
Yeah, I just, how did you get into being this church planting guy? As far as, your ministry trajectory, what did that look like? How did you get into it? Why are you doing this with Jesus?
I love that question because I hate being any kind of a guru at all. I hate it. And I just folded down a podcast that ran for 450 episodes.
Wow.
I was like, I don't think I have more than eight and a half years worth of stuff to say. And it's been kind of repetitive, but I'm getting ready to start a new one called the Church Plantology podcast, which will tell the stories of missionaries all over the world. But I suppose my trajectory has kind of been backwards. Everybody, not in our tribe, of course, but back in the 80s and 90s, I suppose everybody wanted to be the head of a mega church,
right?
At various levels. And I was there. And God called me to the mission field, and I left everything behind in Huntington Beach, California, at a church of 2,000, ended up overseas in a Presbyterian church that had belonged to Lloyd Jones. And that was where, even though in the denomination I was in, we had planted in Hungary and New Zealand, and I was always kind of the more evangelistic side of things. I went to Martin Lloyd Jones's church as an evangelist, and church planting just kind of fell into that. But I did not see myself as a church planter. In fact, 9/11 had hit, and I had lost my support from the States. It dropped in half, so I had to go work with my hands. So over the next 17 years, I was a firefighter, I was a barista. I know you and I share that in common at one stage. I was I'm an RN, so that's part of my background. That's how I became a firefighter, factory worker, and just started unlearning what I had learned in ministry. It was really kind of like the unmaking of Peyton Jones that brought me to church planting. And fast forward, I'm quit ministry after a certain number of years because I took a church that split over the language when I was in Wales, UK. And that broke my pastoral heart. I was trying to hold it together. It was splitting. I just said, God, I think I'm done with this. Too much heartache, too much, I'm wimping out, I'm tapping. And I ended up going to be that barista in a Starbucks and ended up starting this discussion group about Dan Brown Da Vinci Code. 30 non-believers turned up first week, 40 second week. It was only supposed to be a one night only gig.
Wow.
But that got me back into church planting because I'm like, I could do this all day. Bunch of non-believers in the room in Europe talking about Jesus with no agenda, not even trying to start a church. Yeah, I'm into this. And I would say ever since then, the way that I help people start churches is I tell them, don't even worry about the church. You just focus on God and people.
Yeah.
And let the church plant that'll take care of itself if you're doing the other stuff right. That's church starting. I'm not into that. Church starting can be left for others. Church planting is sowing the seeds of the gospel, discipling, and letting the fruit that the Holy Spirit reaps take place. So that's kind of my my potted history.
Well, I love it. And I think, as we're engaging in the community, disciple making should happen. I'll just get into a little bit. When I was working at Starbucks, before my wife and I went to the mission field, it was right when I first met my wife, and we were exploring going to the Middle East, working with Muslims. And I was working at Starbucks, and we were learning Jesus stories every week. And so I would go in to work and I would practice Jesus stories on my coworkers and on the customers. And we would just be sharing stories of Jesus all the time. And I remember one time a coworker came in, and she was really disappointed with the church and the hypocrisy of the church. I think another pastor fell from grace. He got caught in some sort of a scandal, a sin. And she looked at me and she says, the church is just full of hypocrites. Don't you just hate the church? Well, I said, did you know that Jesus didn't like hypocrites either? And she's like, what? I said, well, to everybody who looked down on those around him, Jesus told this story. And I shared the story of the Pharisee, the tax collector, with her. And halfway through that story, she said, stop, stop, stop. And she ran over, she got another one of our coworkers and pulled him in and said, you have to hear this. This is so good. And so shared the whole story of the Pharisee and tax collector. And we ended up having a conversation about Jesus instead of the hypocrisy of the church. It wasn't me defending the faith, defending church. God is able to do that. But it was then we had this conversation about Jesus. And I found that in places like that, in a workplace like that, I was able to have a lot of Jesus conversations that led to some really good fruit that I wouldn't otherwise have if I was in, the confining walls of a church building and trying to, establish something, within those four walls. What did you find as you're in the, in the workplace and, as you're walking with people and pointing them to Jesus? What did that look like for you?
It was so powerful. I mean, I realized quickly why Paul worked with his hands and why he went to the marketplace, even in Corinth, and spent 18 months there. After moving on average 3 to 4 months in each town, that's when he meets Priscilla and Aquila. And, he just convalesces in some senses there. But really, I think that became the start of a bivocational empire that, they kind of like a mission franchise, if you want to put it that way. But for me, that was certainly the case where when I went to Lloyd Jones's church, I was the evangelist. So I remember asking stupidly, well, what does he do? I mean, obviously share the gospel, but for a year, man, I did all this stuff. Like, I would, believe it or not, we knocked on doors. I preached in the open air in the square. Like, I did all the crappy stuff that they told me. Like, well, this is what an evangelist does. So I just went and did it. And I told, it's terrible stuff, right? Like, no, but that's the stuff that makes people run from evangelism. And so I did that. We'd have a rugby star come who had given his life to Jesus, throw a dinner with a bunch of men. No beer there, of course, because it's teetotal. But these things, none of them were effective. And I don't want to denigrate anyone who does those, because I have seen people do every single one of those things extremely well, and they impress me. But I certainly was not good at it. And there was no fruit. But lo and behold, 9/11 hits. I got to go work in the factory, and within maybe 4 or 5 weeks, 3 people come to faith.
Wow.
On that assembly line. And I'm like, okay. And then when I became a firefighter, man, it was tough. That was a rough environment. If anyone's ever been in a pseudo military outfit, or even military itself, it's really tough. And I was seasoned, man, but I wasn't raised in a Christian home, so I could take my family members are in and out of jail. So it was easy for me to slot into a rough environment, but that was a whole new challenge. But they watched me, and they watched me forever. I worked there 4 years, After 3 years of seeing consistency, they started talking to me.
Wow.
It took 3 years. I
Wow.
felt like a failure there,
Yeah.
but they were just sizing me up, man. And
Mm.
it was cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to be heartening for, I have a guy in my home church that's a firefighter, and he just became a firefighter maybe a year ago or so. Just moved down here to Kansas City. And he's struggling in the middle of being in that environment of, he found another believer in there, and they do some things, and it's
Mm,
and it's good, but he wants it to be something where he shows Jesus to these people, and helps
yeah.
encounter. And if it's going to take that long, it would be good for him to hear, like, that's a tough environment. You could do it though.
Well, firefighters think about stuff on a deep level because I mean, I hate to say this, but I mean, some of the stuff we were called into where drunk drivers had just killed,
Oh man.
unjustly a family, or we would go to house fires where kids had died, and of course, my station officer made me the chaplain as well. So if I wasn't actively on the fire or whatever, sometimes I'd be walking over and talking to the grandpa who had just
Mm,
accidentally uh, killed his grandkids, and so all those kinds of things, you realize that these guys, they're thinking about things on a very, very deep level, and they're trying to
yeah.
make sense of the world, and that's part of the reason it's a slow burn. But also, too, I think that when you're dealing with people sizing you up, everybody has problems, and
Yep.
eventually, what I notice is they would eventually, it was almost kind of like a beacon of light, a lighthouse. You don't need a lighthouse,
Yeah.
except for when you're about to get shipwrecked. And sometimes it's that waiting game. It's patience,
Hmm.
being patient for that storm where they need you,
Yeah.
and saying, okay, and I've consistently shown this light and shown them safety. And sometimes that takes people, like, it takes some time to
Yeah.
trust the lighthouse. Okay, that's safe harbor. All
Yeah.
right, okay, I can go. But they're not going to come to you until the storm hits.
Yeah. I think that, when we're talking about evangelism, and I'm talking about church planting with our missionaries, one of the things is, if we have this lifestyle that tells other people that we hear from God, we love Him and we obey Him, people that are open and hungry, people of peace or so, are going to come find us. We don't
Mm,
often find them. They're going to be drawn to what we have. We just have to be obvious about who we are and our faith. And
yeah.
I think there's so many people that are in the workplace that aren't obvious about their faith. Not in an obnoxious way, but just in a genuine way that, hey, I have this
Mm,
faith in Jesus. I hear from Him. I obey Him. I put things into practice in my life. How can we be obvious in those workplace settings without being
mm,
obnoxious and spiritualize things?
yeah. Well, it's funny because I'm not the best evangelist, but I do think that consistency that you hit on there is key. And I also think, just being natural. Like, if God's a piece of your life, don't mute that part of the conversation. Like, I used to find, if I said anything in my work environment, because I've been a tent maker for many, many years. I was like the man with a million jobs at one point, but window cleaner, policy writer for a special, place at housing consortium for people with special needs. I mean, I did so many different jobs just for mission. I got the nickname Ninja because I moved around and plant.
Yeah.
But the thing that happened for me was I would just include, like, if something rad that I was reading, I'd say, I read this thing today. It was so cool. And I just would mention it like
Mm.
people do. I watched a
Yeah.
show last night, or I would just tell people, like, I feel like God is trying to teach me this right now. And I would just say something. It wasn't like I had all the answers, but I would just, if he's a natural part of my life, I would just naturally talk about him, but in a way where, like, I hate math, right? If you
Yeah.
come to me, like, the second you talk about math, I switch off. right? I can handle one or two sentences. And what I would do is I would just throw it out there. And if nobody, I wouldn't keep talking about it.
Yeah.
But I often found people started to feel safe around me and they would say, oh, wait, God's trying to teach you peace? What do you mean?
Hmm.
What is peace? Like, what is that? Like, I know what peace is with war, but what do you mean like peace? Like inner tranquility, kind of yoga
Yeah.
peace? And those were great conversations.
Yeah.
So I would just say just those little throwaway comments, man. Like if you read something cool, you talk about it. If I saw the C.S. Lewis movie, I'd talk about it because that thing was the bomb. If you haven't seen that thing yet, that thing was the bomb.
Yeah.
So
I'm
I
still
would go
missing
into
it.
work and you got to see it, man. Everybody,
Yeah.
you got to see it in theaters till November 25th.
The most
I don't
reluctant
have stock.
convert. You do have some stock in it. I know. Uh, I mean, you're also somebody, especially when you train and do things, you like to use a lot of analogies from movies. And so, what is it of a film, of movies, of things that we
Mm.
can take and learn? How can we actually learn from that and
Oh
grow in our
man.
relationship with Jesus?
Okay, so Josh, you're really good at what you do, man, because these are great questions. Like you're obviously a missionary evangelist. You've done this, you've been there, done that. Because for me, I suppose it comes back to being in the UK and just being surrounded by completely unchurched people. Like
Hmm.
when I first moved there, in the town I was in a steelworking town called Port Talbot, pretty rough place,
Yeah.
working class. This is a scar here. That's not a wrinkle over my left eyebrow. That rugby player just put me down 6 weeks into the country, knocked me out, put me in the
Wow.
hospital. Case of road rage, just a rough place. And but I quickly learned, like, if I said anything about the Bible, this survey that came out, they asked them what's Easter, and school kids were like, well, I think it's when the groundhog comes out, right, and sees a shadow. And one person said, isn't that when like Jesus's his head opened up and fire shot out and went all the way to heaven? And so
Wow.
you realize like the Christian religious, sorry, church
Right.
going attendance, that could be mosque, temple, whatever it is, church, it was 1.6. It's today
Wow.
1.3, and the evangelical presence was a third of a percent. And so it was kind of like, well, they really don't know anything. So I learned, like, the Matrix came out the
Mm.
year that I got there in '99, and I just talked to people about the Matrix all the time,
Yeah.
non-believers. And I even made a little handout I could give people, make them think. Man, that was so effective. People got it. They're like, yeah, like there's this whole world. Like, that's right. You're being kept blinded to yada, yada. And then the other thing was, it just became second nature. Like, you could not preach or talk to people about the Ark of the Covenant. It would take forever. They
Yeah.
had no Bible background. You had to teach them classes to even get to what atonement meant. So I just go, hey, like on that box on Rare's, oh yeah, Rare's a Lost Ark. And so to me, it became a language that I
Mm.
learned to speak, pop
Yeah.
culture, something we shared in common, that, it was kind of like the master has need of this donkey. We're going to ride the gospel in on the back of whatever movie this is. So just to quickly just say, like, I started watching films and all that kind of stuff almost for gospel ends. So like that movie I Am
Mm.
Legend with Will Smith, right? When
Yeah.
that thing came out, I couldn't believe what I'd been given. So here's this
Mm.
movie. It opens, the opening shot says, God has not abandoned us, on this poster. People miss all this stuff in this movie.
Yeah.
And then before his family dies, Will Smith's daughter says, hey, Dad, Mom, teacher says whenever we see a butterfly, it's a sign that God's with us. Then fast
Mm.
forward, when he finds the cure, he puts it in the blood, and he's barricading himself and he's shouting behind this bulletproof glass, I can save you, I can save you. The cure is in the blood. The blood can save you. And he's shouting this out, and they start banging themselves onto this bulletproof glass, and they crack it, and he's shocked. But what his shock is when you see the crack, it forms a butterfly pattern.
Wow.
And when it forms, and people miss this,
Yeah.
but there's this thing. And then he realizes God's with me. He gives the blood to them, which ends up saving humanity. and he sacrifices himself like Christ at that moment so that the world can be saved. So you look at these things, you're like, okay, somebody was thinking in that, right?
Yeah.
Again, there was just a conversation, and people are like, wow, that's it. Not Christians, but non-Christians. I'd
Yeah.
say, it's kind of like that. That's
That's
God.
huge.
And yeah. And so I just learned to have those conversations, and they were really effective.
Yeah, I mean that's so good that wherever you're at, whatever place that you're at, you have to learn the language of the people that you are encountering. Even if it's
Mm.
in Christendom, if you're going, we work interdenominationally. So we have to change our language depending on which denomination we're speaking to. Do you see that play out in other ways, speaking language, different language to others for effectiveness?
I do. One of my favorite examples of this is Bono. There was a book years ago called Bono on Bono, and it was just Bono from U2, who's not shy about his faith at all. But he mentions at one point he discusses, um, he tries to explain what Christ did on the cross in this way. And I'll just give a quick recap. He says, every religion in the world has karma, the idea of karma,
Yeah.
that if you do good things happen to you. If you do bad things happen to you. And usually it meets you in the next life. And he goes, but here's the thing about Christianity. Christianity says, yes, you're building good karma and bad karma, but you only get this one shot. And he goes, and then after that's judgment. But he goes, but Christianity introduces something that no other religion does, this concept of grace.
Hmm.
And he said, the only way grace could be possible is Jesus comes and says, look, I will live a perfect life only with good karma. I will just earn all the good karma you never could. And then I'm going to die for you. And when I die for you, I'm going to take all your bad karma on me and give you all my good karma. And that's called grace. And he goes, and Jesus changed the game on a dime. And he goes, if karma's my judge, he says, I'm pretty screwed. He
Yep.
goes, and this is what he said. So I'm holding out for grace. And, to me, it was so beautiful. He just explained the heart of the gospel in 60 seconds using different language, like the word karma. That'd be anathema to most people in seminary hearing that. And yet the non-believer next to you, and I know, of course, you've been, in different countries where this might be more helpful, but for him, man, I mean, the second he put it like that, something clicked in me.
Yeah.
And I have used that with people so often. And I think language, we have to, C.S. Lewis used Taoism. So many different people have taken language and used it for the gospel to, if it's going to save time and if it's going to save souls, go for it.
Yeah.
I say, use it.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost amalgamous to what Jesus did. It's just using the objects in front of him to make his point. We're using, what people understand, the understanding of the common person in the area and the context that we're in, to share truth, and to share with them what does it actually look like so that they can get it. Yeah, that's good. So what do you think as you're looking at people, what's the status of the church in the West and church planting? Where do you think we're headed? What do you think the next wave is, the next thing is, so that we could see the gospel saturate communities and places?
Man, I think I'm so boring on this, because I'm probably, I mean, you and I do a bit of traveling with and around Alan Hirsch.
Mm-hmm.
And his concept of the forgotten ways is really central to my way of thinking. That I run a network called New Breed, and we always joke and say it's old breed because to me, I'm not a futurist. I don't have a crystal ball, and I always am suspect when someone says the next thing for the church. And I think, how much money do you want? Because I can just give you my wallet and give you money because it's such a gimmick and it's so
Yeah.
hokey, right? And I know that's not what you're asking. You know where I'm going with
Yeah.
this, but it's kind of like for me, the key to the church's future has always been in its past, not an antiquarian love of like the Reformation or an antiquarian love of your favorite preacher from 100 years ago. I literally mean back to the first century.
Yeah.
And as rife as they were with problems and heresy and all kinds of things, that yes, they had the same problems because they had the same people. But the reality is they had a different form of mission that, as Alan points out, comes out of their Christology. So in my latest book, Church Plantology, I start off by contrasting the difference between church starting and church planting.
Mm-hmm.
And church planting is what Paul and the apostles did. It's what Jesus spent 3 years training the 12 to do. And those principles, to me, and I know you'll appreciate this as a missionary, they're timeless. There are principles in the New Testament. You see it in Scripture. I have 3 overlapping circles. You see it in Scripture. It was just something Jesus or Paul did. Is it? And it's not like for a prescription, but it's just are there principles, not methods, but principles
Yep.
that they approached mission with? And can I see that working today on the global mission front? And that's not pragmatism. That's literally, that's what defines a principle. Methods are time bound, but principles are timeless. And then the third circle is, well, surely if it's in Scripture and it works today on mission frontiers, then surely in periods of church history, not just Western church history, but global church history, there would have been times where these principles were enacted, like during the Celtic mission movement or during the Yugoslav movement in the 400 in the 5th century, or during even the what do you call it, the Moravians, or the surely you would see these principles, and sure enough, you do. And so those 3 circles where they overlap, to me, that's a church plantology principle, and that's what the book kind of follows, and it puts it in the term of not innovating, because innovating means I'm an inventor, and I don't want to be an inventor, right? I want to be a scientist. So the book Church Plantology, it is called The Science and Art of Church Planting, because the science is that principle that's embedded in the fabric of the universe. APEST is one of those, of course. And then the art is how you live out. That's where you get to be an artist and creative, and that's where the innovation. But the science part of it, each heading is rediscovering. I feel like, kind of like Alan, we need to rediscover. There are things that our forefathers knew, and at different parts of church history, nobody's holding all of the elephant. But if we could regain these principles, and that's, to me, that's the hope I have for changing the conversation. Because when Zondervan came and said, hey, we want you to write this book, I knew that their job was to sell books. And I said, hey, the only thing is, I like you guys, and I've published a book with you before, but you guys know we want to sell books, right? If you let me write your church planting textbook, because it's a textbook, they stuck it next to Keller's, and they said Keller's was like a manifesto of city urban ministry. They said, well, we need a church planting textbook, same size, same ilk. And I said, I'll break your church planting library. You know that, right? Like, this is going to be the opposite of probably what's going to sell books. And they said, no. Credit to them. They said, no. If that's the case, and it's gonna change the game. I don't think it changes a game. I just think for our tribe, Josh, the missional, Alan, you, me, Hugh Halter, Brian Sanders, the people that we probably travel with, they've said, finally, we have a book. Brad Briscoe, Brad was the first one to say, this is our book, man. Like, this book isn't like, we don't have to shed all this baggage to learn about church planting. This is what our tribe is. This is our tribe's book.
Well, it's so good. And it's like being an archaeologist, that you're unearthing what has already been there and what's actually embedded already in the body of Christ, and what is the DNA that God has put in there. And Jesus, as upon Peter, the rock, as he built his church, saying these are the DNA, the bedrock of the DNA of what it looks like to be the church and be the body. And a lot of times we've taken in the West, I think, hey, we have these principles of basically starting and running institutions. And if we can get away from starting and running institutions into a place where we're discovering what is the DNA, and we're building upon the bedrock and of DNA, the foundational stuff that Jesus has laid in there, and it's latent, that we can discover that again, that we could rediscover. I think we're going to see a lot of different methods, different variations on that, but that DNA is going to be core, and it's going to be the same across the board. So I said thank you for putting those principles into play, because those principles are key, is what we have to keep at the forefront of what we are doing and where we're going, so that we could play around and be that artist that you said, with those principles, because there's so many different contexts out there.
Yeah, and that's the key, is one of the things that we said is, these principles help us basically take the gospel anywhere to anyone at any time. That's what those three overlapping circles actually mean. And that's kind of what I'm interested in, and so for me, for this generation coming up, my hope is that, we get to corrupt them more, and corrupt them in a good way. Like Socrates, all teachers really want to corrupt the next generation.
Well, I think the next generation and the generations to come, I think, what you're seeing in, especially in Gen Z, is that you're seeing something of their yearning for and wanting community and being with one another in a different way than we've seen for a while. And, a lot different way than baby boomers, Gen X, as we're trying to go our own way, individualism. I think we're actually seeing something shift and change, even here, that they're hungry for a new way.
And one of the things in the book that I lay down is kind of something dear to my heart, is ministry in public space. My second book was called, it's funny you mentioned archaeology. My second book was called Reaching the Unreached, Becoming Raiders of the Lost Art. And my first book is called Church Zero. I'm not trying to sell books. There's a continuity through all my books where I talk about discussion, the power of interaction with this generation. And so in Church Zero, I start with this whole idea of, coming into church, we don't sit in rows, we sit in half circles. Yeah. And there's small groups hardwired into the church, like when we gather. So yeah. And it came from like starting a church in a Starbucks or, in collegiate towns where interaction was key. Everything I do is highly interactive. Yeah. But it's more this generation, they have told us, we don't just sit and listen or watch anything. We interact. And I look back at the early church, and there's like 32 one another's in the New Testament. And I'm like, man, where can we do this? Well, we do this. The church is wired for this. Like that whole recent thing about, the metaverse that, Facebook said, we're going to connect people in a new way. The church should have been the place where people were connecting. I mean, AA, took the principles of small groups and brilliantly used it for transformation. This is our domain. Yeah. This is what we excel at, is connection. But if you're just going to preach at people, and I got no problem with preaching. I'm a fan of preaching. I think preaching's great. But if you don't give people a chance to talk back, and to interact, you've lost this next generation. Yeah. And so I spend 2 whole chapters in this book. It's a 10th of the book, actually talking about, how do you do this? How do you do ministry? How would you rock an open mic night in the gay coffee house? So that's what we did in the Rainbow District in Long Beach when I was playing there. It was brilliant. I mean, it was just like, these are the things you go into ministry for, right? I quit over the other stuff years ago, but this is the stuff that got me back in and kept me back in. It doesn't look like conventional ministry really, but it's what keeps me in.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and you have that. But even, people that are in these institutionalized churches, I think, some people that are from my staff they went to a local church here, they go to a local church here, and through their influence, they've changed the seating structure. So they actually gather around tables on a Sunday morning instead of in rows. And so that means that after, the pastor gives a 20-minute sermon, that there's a discussion group built in right there. And so they have questions, Discovery Bible questions from the sermon and the passage. And it's taken a long time to reorient that body to be able to say, oh, we're supposed to actually do something about this and learn and implement what we have. But they're doing it. And so even somebody in this institution can change the model and the game a little bit.
Yeah, and I noticed, it was really funny when I plant like this. Christians come, check it out, don't like it, leave.
Yeah.
People that are just on this new journey with Jesus and just finding him, they love it. Yep. And your church service, it's not, I say church service, but it's not like how do I put it? It's like this interactive, living, breathing thing.
Yeah.
Sounds so boring when you say church service, but it has everything. It has discipleship hardware, evangelism, laying on of hands, praying for one another, communion. Like it's all this worship, but the rad thing is that they don't want to go home. So like our services, because they had so much interaction, they were like 2 hours long. And then an hour after everything ended, I'm still going, everybody go home. Like go eat. We ate at the beginning. Like that was the other thing. We eat. I always feed people. Like I learned that if you want to know the great missional secret, there's two: feed people, let them talk. There's something so first century about that.
Yeah.
But that was it. That's the key to me. But they just, when people are finding Jesus, they don't want to stop talking. They don't want to stop meeting.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the place, and we want to get to, and it brings life back into people that have been following Jesus for a long time, to have people that are first discovering Jesus with them.
Yeah.
And that's where, I see a lot of, dying churches it's because we're not bringing anybody in new that's discovering Jesus. And we're like, hey, what are we doing? And so we have to, as you're looking at APAS, we have to bring in that evangelistic, and we have to bring in the apostolic, saying, hey, we're planting new expressions out there. And, we are doing this open mic night in this, in the Rainbow District. What does it look like to do these new expressions? So we have to have that APAS expression, or churches are going to end up being stale and dying out.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, because I love how Rich Robinson always talks about the Brighton Rock. If you cut it anywhere, Brighton Rock is a candy that has like writing on the inside of it. Anywhere you cut that, it's like a big peppermint stick. Anywhere you cut it, you can see the writing. And it's the same with this book. APAS goes all the way back to the burden. Why do you want to plant? Yeah. Well, probably you're going to say one of five things. I think people need to know doctrine and theology. Okay, teacher. Yeah. Or I think people need to know the gospel. All right, evangelist. Or I think, the church needs to mobilize on mission. And, I just want to see the glory of Christ. Okay, apostolic. Yeah. I just want people to know the presence of God. And, they come in and they experience, okay, prophet. Right. So at every set where I want people to grow deep in the church and be a family and disciple. Okay, shepherd. So these burdens, I kind of argue in it. Hey, if not just one planner, that's another thing I think we need to get away from. It's team planting. It's APEST. It's Paul's strike teams that we see in the New Testament. It's moving out and planting as a team so that APEST is fully represented. Then when you mentioned earlier, like I talk about the APEST liturgy, that many of our liturgies are based on one specific function of Christ. Whereas when you start planting, you get a chance to plant in APES liturgy. Liturgy
Mm.
being used very loosely, work of the people, right?
Yep.
Not meaning high church or low church. I think both of those are great for different reasons. What element of the prophetic, what element of the apostolic, what element of each of the APES should be represented? What aspect of the function of Christ's ministry is absent in our gathering? And craft an APES liturgy. And the book kind of unpacks that a little bit.
Yeah. I think that's so good that we need to have those, and we need to really realize that the body of Christ is holistic, that there's more elements than our own natural biases towards what we see as, hey, this is what my motivation is, or this is what I'm passionate about. There's more to it than that, and so we do need one another. That's why there are so many one another's in the New Testament. We have to have each other. I was just talking to somebody the other day, and she's trying to say, how do we get my churches and the pastors of my churches to be focusing on mission and movement of multiplication? And the first thing I said is, I think the first thing is you need to focus on APEST, that it's going to take the burden off of the solo pastor and say,
Yes.
oh, I could do this with other people, and others have this wiring and gifting that I don't have. So we could do it with each other. And so the pastor has to give permission to say, go and run with this. And, I'm here and I'm support. But we have to get away from it all runs through one person. It's just not sustainable. We have to get
Mm,
to a place of empowering and equipping one another so that the work can get done.
yeah. Amen.
A couple of questions I like to ask in the end. One is, if you could go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Ooh, I love this question. Okay, so obviously I'm no stranger to you two or Bono, right? I'm a Bonoist. Do you want to know what denomination I belong to? I'm a Bonoist. If I were to go back, I would tell that young man he was apostolic
Mm,
before it was cool, right? Because I didn't understand I had a life cycle in a place. Like it still to this day doesn't matter. You put me in a position, you give me a job, you pay me a bunch of money, you give me an executive card. And I've been there in different roles. I don't stay.
mm,
And it's the apostolic. It's you commit career suicide time after time after time. And I remember at one point going, do I have like ministerial attachment issues or something? Like, do I need counseling? But I didn't realize I was apostolic. And one of the really amazing things to me, I mentioned Bono because he's got a song on, I believe it's either songs of innocence or songs of experience. And it's the song where this is what it's about. It's about he, as an older man, having a conversation with himself on the stairway. The younger him is sitting
mm,
there, and he's like a ghost. And it's called The Little Things That Give You Away.
mm,
And he has this conversation with his 20-year-old self, just breaking into it, signing a record deal. And he starts lecturing him at the beginning of the song
mm.
and telling him, you walked in like you own the place. There's only me that sees there's something wrong there. So he's psychoanalyzing his younger self.
Wow.
But what's amazing in the song is it flips around and his younger self starts admonishing his older self with some of the things he forgot. And so I am always aware that I knew things then that I've
Mm,
forgotten now,
yeah.
and I know things now I wish he knew then.
What have you been reading or watching lately that you could recommend?
Ooh, I'm on this weird journey right now. I'm reading a liturgy for ordinary radicals. that Shane Claiborne edited. I'm finding that fascinating and amazing for my walk. I'm going through this pilgrimage right now. You know, we talked liturgy a bit, and I'm looking. When I first got saved, the only church I could get to, because I was 15, I didn't have a car, was an Episcopal church. And so
Yep.
I learned to worship with very high church liturgical. And then, you know, I found a church that, you know, my friends are going to, that I can get to, and yada, yada. And so I started going there, and I ditched all that. And as I've gotten older, there's a part of me that's kind of grabbing on to the ancient ways and some of the literature. I don't idolize them, but I'm exploring them. And so Winfield Bevins just sent me a bunch of books, and I'm reading through those. One is called Simply Anglican. I'm not saying I'm going to become an Anglican. Peyton Jones and denominational trappings don't do too well. He's tried. But I love the entire body of Christ, and I like to just celebrate and enjoy what different aspects of the body have. And part of that's the APEST. You see the different APEST reflected. I don't crap over denominations. So I'm like, oh, you're the teacher. Oh, you're the prophetic. Oh, okay. But I guess I'm always on a quest to see them come together. TV shows, believe it or not, I'm just going through The Office, and I just watched last night where Michael Scott left, and I got emotional as he's leaving the airport, going to the airport. And I was really shocked that it actually hit me. Like, wow, dude, you have gotten invested. I've never seen The Office before, and I have just enjoyed this show. I did watch Ted Lasso. But it's hard when you're watching The Office for the first time at the same time as Ted Lasso. To me, nothing can compare to The Office. I am just so enjoying that show.
I love The Office. It's good. I do love Ted Lasso. I'm actually wearing a Ted Lasso sweatshirt at the moment. Believe. So I'm wearing that. I got that for my birthday. So I love Ted Lasso, but I love The Office.
It's a great show. And as a guy that lived in Britain for 12 years, church planting there and adjusting, there's so many connections. I think, does the American audience get this? Because that was really funny. It's like a one statement throwaway that they make. And I think, I don't know that people have the cultural equity to get what they just said, but that was hilarious.
Yeah, we had a Dutchie in our home church for a long time. So you know, that Dutch soccer player, just everything that he says and does is so Dutch. It is perfect.
Oh my gosh! That one line in there in the locker room. He's not being blunt. He's just being Dutch. It was so golden.
Yeah, it's so good. There's so many incredible cultural stuff in there. So it's so good. Well, Peyton, it was just a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And so your book, Church Plantology, people could go out and find that. And where else could people find you?
Yeah, anywhere. And they can, if you want to check with me, I'm at newbreedtraining.com, and you can email that if you want to get in touch or, connect. And then, of course, you and I are leading 5Q movement planning courses together. Yeah. We've been tag teaming that. So I got to give us a shout out, right?
That's right. It's been really fun. It's good. I'm really, really loving it. It's really, really great to be a part of that and to journey with you in that. So it's been good. So, all right. Thanks, brothers. Peyton. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, man.
Thank you for listening to the show today. If you're really enjoying the show, please don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app. You can do it right now. Just hit that little plus. And then I would love it if you would leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. So you could go right now to the show and leave a star rating and review and let us know how you are enjoying the show. And find us on Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to connect, interact, I post a lot of quotes and different things that you could actually interact with the episodes and let me know how you are enjoying the show. If you feel inclined to donate, there is a support the show link in the show notes, and it would send you directly to a page where you could donate so that new episodes can be produced for your enjoyment. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have an incredible week.